So let's take a look at Dynamesh and insert mesh brushes. So to begin, let's just take a little review of Dynamesh. Dynamesh functions by dynamically subdividing your mesh as you change the volume. So if I go into frame mode on this character here, you'll see that this is a Dynamesh mesh. There's no ordered topology. It just looks like a blanket of little quad faces with the occasional triangle. Now, if I go to the geometry menu and open up the Dynamesh menu, you'll see that Dynamesh is turned on and the resolution is set to 768. That's why we're able to pick up this level of detail in the Dynamesh. Now, we've seen in the quick start video that you can push and pull your shapes regardless of what the volumes are. You can keep growing your shapes and then dividing as you go, and the Dynamesh will continue to update. So for example, if I were to mask out these spheres here and I wanted to pull these out into a long sort of tendril or tentacle shape, we'll unmask that, take the move brush, and we can just pull the move brush out. And I'm just using this to stretch these shapes out. And you see that the geometry here is getting very, very hopelessly stretched. There's just no way that you can clean that up if you were using normal subdivisions. So I'm just going to use the inflate brush here just to inflate it a little bit. Use the move brush just to sharpen the point. And now I'm going to control, click, and drag on the background once, and that clears the mask. Now if I control, click, and drag again, it dynameshes, which rebuilds this mesh and rebuilds this whole stretched out nasty bit of geometry there. You see, that's now all blanketed with quads. And there's a few little problem spots there which we can fix just by smoothing it. We'll smooth this all out, take the move brush, and just continue to refine our horn shape here. I'm going to grab the pinch brush, just pinch this down into a horn or a tentacle. We're not really sure which this is. It's a little flat. It almost looks like a bunny ear. Bunny ear invaders. So there you go. Here you can see that I can just take this mesh and then stretch it way out and then use Dynamesh to rebuild that geometry. I'm going to scrub my undo slider here just to go back to before those horns were added. Your undo slider is this dashed line at the top of your workspace. If you click and drag this, you can scrub through all of your actions. So we'll go back to here. Now, Dynamesh works like this. As I continue pushing and pulling the shapes, I will dynamically rebuild them. So I'm going to go to the light box here, and let's just open up a polysphere, since it's a very simple base shape. We'll turn on our X symmetry, go into frame mode, and we can start shaping this. Now I'm going to go to geometry. I'm going to turn on Dynamesh. Resolution 128 is probably more than enough to start with. So I will click Dynamesh. Now it says the mesh has multiple subdivision levels. Do you want to freeze them? I don't. Freezing subdivision levels temporarily gives your model one subdivision level, so you can use tools that require the mesh not to have divisions, like insert mesh brushes or Dynamesh, etc. Then when you unfreeze the subdivision levels, it tries to restore your subdivisions. I tend not to use it. I find that the technique that I talk about in the Z-Remesher video that allows us to bounce back and forth between a multiple subdivision model and a Dynamesh actually supplants the freezing of subdivision levels for me. So I'm going to select No. So now we've got a Dynamesh mesh. We can push and pull this mesh, stretch things out, then control, click, and drag, and it executes the Dynamesh. Now remember, if I were to mask an area out, like let's say I mask out this area here, take the move brush and just pull this shape out. If I control, click, and drag the first time, that clears the mask. Control, click, and drag a second time, that's what executes the Dynamesh. So when you have Dynamesh turned on, control, clicking, and dragging on the background is what actually executes it. So we've already seen that in the quick start tutorial where we've just used Dynamesh to create a new head. When you're working with Dynamesh, you can turn your resolution up or down. I prefer, when I'm first starting out a character, to actually turn this down relatively low, what happens then is I get a lighter mesh. And I think that just technique-wise, that helps because it forces you to think about big shapes. Then as you start to add more and more details, like for example, if I wanted to come in and start sculpting wrinkles or something, those are quite jaggy, so I would probably turn up my resolution then and execute Dynamesh again, and then that would allow me to get some more detail in there. So the most important thing to think about when you're working with Dynamesh is that you can build any volume that you want. It's just you need to be thinking about form. That's kind of the baseline go-to you must always remember in ZBrush whenever you're sculpting. Remember to keep an eye on your form. Keep thinking about your form, because Dynamesh does allow you to get in here and do lots of detail and do lots of shapes, but you need to always be thinking about your skeletal structure, your muscle and bone structure, and all of that. And we talk about that a bit in Quick Start. We talk about it a bit when we're sculpting the import mesh. So we touch on this a few times throughout the series of videos. I just like to impress that point home in my classes, that if you can keep one thing stuck as a sticky note to the side of your computer, it's think about form, because form is what's going to make your sculptures interesting and beautiful and compelling, more than any details or any spikes or tentacles or anything else. It's that overall form. So while we're working with a Dynamesh like this, we're able to push and pull and change our resolution and whatnot, but something that's really, really nice is it facilitates us using insert mesh brushes. Now, insert mesh brushes work like this. Let's go back to Dynamesh. There we go. If I go to B for brush, I for insert, there's a whole series of brushes here called IMM or insert. So let's say, for example, I want to insert a primitive. I will go to the light box. I'll go to my brush menu. I will go to the insert section here, insert IMM. And here I'm going to have insert sphere. So I'm going to double click that. So that's just giving me the insert sphere brush. Now watch this. If I click and drag, that inserts two spheres into this sphere and automatically masks the original mesh. So that means I can take my gizmo now and I can move these spheres around, and I don't have to worry about moving the original mesh. I can change their position, I can change their scale, I can change their rotation. There we go. What character could that be? Control, click, and drag once on the background to clear the mask. Let me zoom in on the seam here so you can see what happens. Control, click, and drag a second time, and that executes Dynamesh. Now also notice that it kind of bakes in that faceting a little bit, so you might want to give that just a quick smooth to smooth out any sort of faceting on those insert mesh pieces. So there you go. That insert mesh brush allows us to insert the sphere. Now remember, brushes, if you hold down the Alt key, they subtract. So if I hold down the Alt key and drag two spheres, I get the same thing, but the spheres have inverted normals, and that's just the way of showing me that that's going to subtract. So here, let's say I want to change the scale of these, change their position. Control, click, and drag once, control, click, and drag a second time, and now that subtracts those shapes. Now we can do something really interesting here. If we go to the light box, I find it easy to do this if you grab the insert cylinder brush. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and that drags the cylinder out. Now keep moving your brush up and down and it will stretch that cylinder. This is true for any insert mesh. So it goes all the way through the object. Now I'm going to go down to display properties here and I'm going to turn on double-sided just to make it easier to see. And I'm going to use my gizmo just to position these cylinders so they're passing through the shape. Okay? There we go. Then when I'm happy with their positioning, control, click, and drag once, control, click, and drag twice. And there we have cut holes straight through that mesh. So these basic kind of primitive insert mesh brushes are really nice for doing things like adding spherical forms, subtracting them, cutting holes. Remember, in the Lightbox brush menu, you have a whole bunch of alternative brushes that just haven't been loaded in by default. So be sure to go in here and explore, because there's quite a few brushes in here that'll come in handy. I'm going to go back to our main brush menu, close the light box, go back to our main brush menu, go back to Insert, and now we can take a look at some of these other insert mesh brushes. You'll notice that the insert cylinder and insert sphere were just simply insert cylinder or insert sphere. Now these are called IMM brushes, and what that means are these insert multiple meshes. So instead of just inserting a single sphere or a single cylinder, these insert multiple meshes. So if I grab the IMMB parts brush here, that has 20 pieces to it. If I select that, press the M key, look at this. All these different meshes, which can be inserted using this brush. So for example, if I grab the dog head, click and drag here, it draws the dog head onto my mesh. I can now take the gizmo, then position the dog head. Oops. Now remember also what I was saying, that you want to be careful about the facets. So I'd give it a light tapping here just to clean up some of those facets a bit. Control, click and drag once to clear the mask. Control, click and drag a second time. And then that blends the dog head onto our whatever it is we've just made. So let's take a look at using this IMMB parts brush in action. Let's go back to our alien here. So let's say I want to add a torso and arms to this alien. I'll go to B for brush, I for insert, make sure I have the IMMB parts brush selected. Here you can see at the top of the screen all the different meshes that we can insert with this brush. Let's go to the torso. I'll double click this one, and I will click and drag. Make sure I bring the two dots together. Click and drag, and that draws that torso. I'll use the gizmo to position it. I'm unlocking the rotation point there so I can move it around. Let's scale that up. Now I'm going to use the move brush, and it's really handy that the brush automatically masks out the shape that you've drawn it into. It makes it easier for us to go in here and match up pieces without affecting the original mesh. So I just want to get the torso lined up pretty closely to the shapes already established in my sculpt of the bust here. And I don't want to lose too much of my detail in the back, so let's push that in. There we go. Awesome. So now I'm going to control, click and drag once, control, click and drag a second time, and that will execute that Dynamesh. And watch what happens. ZBrush is just going to think about it for a second, and there we go. It has now blended those together. Be aware, though, that those facets that were in that insert mesh did get baked in. So we'll just take the smooth brush to them just to smooth it back, just to knock down those facety bits, because they're ugly and we don't want to maintain those. And then we'll come in here and maybe do a little bit of smoothing along this transitional point here. There we go. We'll blend all this together. So we've just added a torso base shape onto our model very quickly, very easily. So let's go ahead and add some arms now. I'll go back to B for brush, I for insert, go to the insert multi-mesh B parts brush, and let's just grab an arm. So I've selected that arm, click and drag, and it draws that arm out. So it's not going to draw out in the perfect position. I just draw it out about the size that I think I want it. Then I use my gizmo to position it. So let's go ahead and position these. I'm going to unlock the gizmo and just go ahead and place it at the shoulder here. Let's lock it again, and then let's move these arms to get them about where we want them. These can scale down. So the arms are looking nice, but I want the proportions to be different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the move brush here, and I'm just going to, I'm going to scoot these faces in so they're intersecting with the body. So when we blend them together, they blend together seamlessly and nicely. So let's bring those in like that. Let's bring the armpit up. I like to move these faces up on the underside of the arm, because that's a big point in making the arm feel realistic, is to have the actual armpit there. If you don't have the armpit, then it looks like the arm is just a big tree trunk attaching to the torso, and that's not good. That doesn't ever look good. So just be aware that when you're attaching an arm, to make sure that you take the moment to go in there and get the armpit itself. That helps you create that sense of the muscles of the bicep and the muscles of the tricep in the back and the coracobrachialis here, all tucking up and grabbing onto the chest. Awesome. So before we execute the Dynamesh, these arms are actually just too short. They don't feel right for the character that I want to do. So I'm going to mask out. I'm just going to add to my mask. I'm going to mask out the first portion of the arm here. I'm going to go to the gizmo. And you could scale the arm like this, but what I prefer to do is grab the scale tool from transpose. You get that just by turning the gizmo off. Then you get a transpose line. Now we talk about transpose in our chapter on the gizmo and transpose. So if you haven't reviewed that, go back and look at that video. But I'll just give you a little reminder here. We'll draw our transpose line, and we're in move, not scale, move. And I will click and drag, and that will scale this arm. You can either use the middle button or the outermost circle, and that just gives it a nice length there. So I'm going to mask down to here now. And I want to do the same thing for the forearm. I just want to give a nice long forearm here. I just want this alien to have real elongated proportions. I find that really cool. There we go. So we've got nice long arms there. And those fall about right because his thighs would be here, and those fingertips should fall on the thighs, not at the hips. I would like to extend the hands too, so let's do that. Let's go ahead and mask out down to here. Now you can use your topology masking to mask out down to the hand like that. And let's go ahead and draw a transpose line here, and let's elongate the bones of the carpals themselves. So we're just going to drag that down. That extends those fingers out. Now let's mask right down to the fingers here. And let's draw a transpose line here, and we can extend those fingers a bit. Make sure that we don't miss any masked areas there. There we go. Now a tip, as you are Dynameshing, anytime you've got fingers or toes close together, it's actually really good practice to come in here and just use your transpose line to sort of spread these fingers out. The reason for that is, as you're Dynameshing, anything that's too close together, unless your resolution is set high enough, they do sometimes get little webbing or get stuck together. So it's a nice practice just to be aware of that, and just when you can, spread the fingers out. It'll save you a lot of headache at some point in your workflow if you take the time to do this. There we go. So that just spreads those fingers out a bit. Very cool. So I like the look of those hands now. They're feeling a bit more creaturey. And that is a word, creaturey. Now let's execute our Dynamesh. So you see that these are two separate objects right now. I'm going to control, click, and drag. By the way, if you clear your mask and you want to get it back, these are still polygrouped. So you can still control, shift, click on the arms and mask them, and then invert that mask if you want to do a last minute fix, like maybe this transition into the deltoid here. Maybe I just want to fix that up a little bit. I can do that, and then execute Dynamesh. So now we can go in with our smooth brush and let's just smooth down those facets. As we go, we just want to clean that up so it doesn't carry those faceted kind of ugly shapes. Now look how nice it is that we took the time to go and put the armpit in there. I always tell my students in class when we're working on sculpting full bodies is if you were to take your hand and literally sort of grab where your arm attaches to your torso. So to put your thumb up in your armpit and then put your middle finger on top of your shoulder where the joint is for your arm and your shoulder bones. That's the actually called the acromion process there. If you do that, you'll feel how the actual connection point of the arm to the body is not really that thick. The thing is that you've got the muscles, the pectoralis right here, this triangle here. Oops. This triangle of muscles right here. And then you've got the triangle of muscles back here, which are the teres major and minor coming off of the scapula. So this creates the back wall of your armpit. This creates the front wall of your armpit. Then you've got the meatiness of the deltoid on top. So if you dip up in here, you know, right inside the armpit, that's basically the joint of the humerus bone. So you've got the bicep muscle here and the coracobrachialis muscle. You've got the tricep muscle back here, and the teres major and minor, creating that back wall and front wall of the armpit. So it makes it look like it's a thicker connection there. But if you just had the arm connecting like a big trunk to the body, it feels wrong. It looks wrong, and it sort of introduces some moments from the viewer. So just a little tip that I thought I would kind of throw in there. Just want to knock back those facets using my smooth brush here. Now, don't smooth these fingers down too much, because if they get too thin, you'll end up having Dynamesh damage them. Dynamesh will end up making holes in them or making them disappear. So I'm just going to take the inflate brush to them just to give them some body. And they're alien fingers anyway, so it makes sense they'd be kind of bulbous and alien-y. That's also a word, alien-y. There we go. So cool. We've attached some arms now. We've attached a torso very, very quickly. I mean, imagine if you had to model these things. IMM just allows you to take generic parts and just slap them right into the model and then start customizing them for your needs. Also be aware that you can create your own IMM brushes. As a matter of fact, I'm going to show you how to do that. Very cool. So let's just do a little bit of tweaking here. Smooth this back, smooth this back. And let's do a little bit of transition in here. I'm going to grab my standard brush with the alpha here. This is my favorite alpha for wrinkles. It's number 58. We'll turn down our Z intensity, and I'm just going to run these across, following that flow of the wrinkles that were already established in the bust. I do want to have the pectoralis muscles here, so I'm going to take my clay tubes brush, turn off the alpha, and then turn down the focal shift. And I'm just going to continue those muscles here. There we go. Make sure you don't neglect this triangular depression here. That's a nice landmark to have on your sculpture. That's called the infraclavicular fossa, which is the fancy Latin way of saying the hollow fossa under the clavicle, infraclavicular. Most anatomical names are deceptively complicated. It's just very, very banal statements in Latin, like the sternoclavicular notch right here. That's the notch between the sternum, this bit right here, and the clavicles, these bits right here. So it's the sternoclavicular notch. So anatomical terminology is really just making basic statements. The reason that medical anatomical terms are in Latin, not that the first Western anatomists were Roman and Greek. No, it's because it was sort of the generic language that could be used in Europe at the time, because you didn't want to have a French doctor and a British doctor and let's say a Norwegian doctor all in a room trying to communicate with each other in different languages. So Latin was adopted as the sort of generic language of the medical community. Just going to sketch in the flow of those serratus muscles there. Just want to get the sense of the thoracic arch, the rib cage. Don't be afraid just to be loose and gestural with this. It doesn't have to be really resolved. You don't have to make every stroke perfect the first time. Just have fun. Just make the shapes. I'm going to bring the thoracic arch of the rib cage out. I like to have the rib cage jut forward a bit because it creates kind of an arch to the back and an interesting kind of posture here. We'll bring the sternum forward so it feels like that's all thrust forward a bit. There we go. And I'm going to take the damn standard brush, turn down my Z intensity, and just sort of sketch in where the lateral obliques would be. And then smooth that back. Don't be afraid to smooth back your sculpting either. When I'm sculpting in clay, I'm always making shapes and then taking a finger dipped in water and then rubbing those shapes away. The idea is that you build up the form gradually over time, over and over again on top of itself, and you end up with a more realistic and subtle form that way than if you try and come in here and just immediately create the exact shape. which is never really realistic, in the same way as just having something that's built up gradually over time. Let's go back to our standard brush and let's get some more of these wrinkles in here. Not worrying too much about being too precious with these wrinkles. I really just want to break the surface up. I want to break up that specular highlight and sort of get an idea of the directionality of the wrinkle flow here. These wrinkles would flow in this direction because that's where the skin would compress. So think about that as you're sculpting wrinkles. Think about what direction the skin would actually compress in, because that's a really important kind of visual cue for you as to the directionality of the wrinkles underneath. I'm going to turn down the Z intensity on my clay tubes brush and just start thinking about that sternum there. I'm going to put a hint of the xiphoid process here. That's a little pokey out bit at the very middle of the thoracic arch. You don't really see it on someone unless they're very, very skinny, because the muscle grabs onto it. So if you've got muscle there, it tends to obscure it. I'm going to take the standard brush with alpha 1. I'm going to turn down my Z intensity, and I'm just going to very gently kind of suggest some ribs here. And then smooth that back. There we go. Smooth back these wrinkles at the back. Go back to our standard brush with alpha 58 and just continue to kind of add some interest to the skin here. One really nice thing about this particular alpha 58, is I'm holding down the Alt key right now to create recessed wrinkles. But if you let go of the Alt key, you can create these nice raised wrinkles with it. I'll turn up the Z intensity so you can see it better. Like these tissuey paper kind of wrinkles are really nice when you're doing creature skins, because it creates a sense of like a raised, almost tissue papery kind of effect on the flesh. Think about, I call it nana skin, like nana hands. If you think about like a grandmother's hands and how the flesh along the back can become very raised in the wrinkling. Like that. That's what this brush tends to call to mind for me. Let's turn down the Z intensity on that smooth brush. Create some nice wrinkling here. There we go. So I just wanted to start to integrate those pieces a little bit more so they weren't just kind of these generic, faceless, nameless kind of insert meshes there. I wanted to really feel like it had some character. I'm going to turn down the Z intensity on this brush and just, again, I'm at this stage just sort of breaking up the surface. So we break up that specular highlight. You can go in and do a lot more detailing, of course, but sometimes it's helpful just to add a bit of noise and break things up. Some people actually do this with the noisemaker, which we'll talk about in another video. There we go. And we'll knock that back with some smooth.